2021 Study and Formulating Committee meeting. The first order would be to establish a quorum by roll call. So when I call the committee member's name, just please answer as present or yes. Mr. Cleophas Rucker.
Present.
Mr. Richard Chapman.
Present.
Mr. Nick Brassel.
Present.
And Ms. Kim Stagg.
Present.
As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the governor issued Executive Order number 16, extended by Executive Orders number 34, 51, 60, 65, and now 71, authorizing committees to meet and conduct their essential business by electronic means if the committee determines that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. Before considering any items on the agenda, the committee will need to determine by roll call vote that this meeting does constitute essential business of the committee and meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the outbreak. Let's take a vote. Mr. Cleophas Rucker?
Yes.
Mr. Richard Chapman?
Yes.
Mr. Nick Brassel?
Yes.
And Ms. Kim Stagg?
She's on mute.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, if you are using audio-only participation and wish to speak, please identify yourself prior to speaking. Next is the approval of the December 1st and December 14th, 2020 meeting minutes. I would like to propose two modifications to the December 14 minutes and the discussion item on number 4. On page 3, first in the last sentence of the third paragraph, delete the language following the works pharmacy benefit structure and add a period to the following structure. Second, in the first sentence of the 8th paragraph of the same item, delete the words on the cost of living adjustment on and inserting in its place for planned adjustments to. If everyone is okay with these modifications, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the December 1st and the December 14th meeting minutes?
This is Richard Chapman, so moved.
Okay, thank you. And a second?
Second. Kim
Okay, that
Stagg.
was Kim Stagg, second. Let's take a vote. Mr. Cleophas Rucker?
Yes, I accept.
Mr. Richard Chapman?
Yes.
Mr. Nick Brassel?
Yes.
And Ms. Kim Stagg?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. We will move to agenda items. I am going to move to the first agenda item, which is the actuarial costing and savings that the committee had asked our actuarial consultants, Finley, to present. I have moved the presenter role to Mr. Joe Myers from Finley. I believe he will start this off with us, and then Mr. Kevin Sullivan from Finley also has a presentation. And when Joe, when you get done, I will move that presenter role over to Kevin so he can share his screen. So I've already moved it over to you. So whenever you would like to share your screen, please go ahead.
Okay, I don't see the presenter role switched to me yet.
Okay, Sade, can you move that over to him? Yeah, I moved the little
For Joe?
better, Joe Myers, yeah.
Yes. So he should be able to, at the bottom, you can hit share content and you can share your screen.
Okay,
Gotcha. Okay, thank you very much.
thank you. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, can everyone see my screen and the presentation now?
Yes, I can see it, Joe.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. As a follow-up to our last meeting, we were going to address some of the open issues for the committee to decide on. What I'll be presenting on this morning is the open healthcare items. Specifically on the agenda, page 2, we're going to talk about the migration to the Medicare Advantage plan for all Medicare eligible employees. I'm also going to talk about removing the out-of-pocket limits in the Metro Code. And lastly, I'll be talking about changing the drug cost sharing on the PPO plan to either 3 or 4 tier from the current 2 tier. Starting with the migration to Medicare Advantage, I'm going to give you an overview and then talk about the savings opportunity that Metro has. Just as a recap, the retiree medical plan liabilities must be reported under the GASB rules on Metro's financial reporting. Metro offers 2 plans. One is for the government employees and one is for schools employees. In total, the plans have $4.3 billion of liability that shows up on Metro's finances. But specifically addressing the government plan, Metro currently offers 3 options for post-Medicare retirees. In addition to the traditional plans that are currently offered by Blue Cross and Cigna, Metro retirees have an option to go into the Medicare Advantage plan offered by Humana. As you can see, the contributions for the Humana plan are much less than the Blue Cross and Cigna plan. And currently 29% of the retirees that are Medicare eligible elect the Medicare Advantage plan. So it does have a lot of traction at this point. If Metro were to change the design so that all post-Medicare retirees elect the Medicare Advantage plan, there'd be a savings of $1.1 billion, mainly because the Medicare Advantage plan has premiums that are much lower than the other 2 plans. The $1.1 billion is an overall liability savings, but the annual savings in the initial year would be anywhere from $14 to $21 million. A question that the committee had a few months back is anyone going to be negatively affected by Metro making this change? And from talking to HR, and they deal with the participants, in addition to looking at the designs, Metro is unaware of any example where a participant will be worse off once they switch to the Medicare Advantage plan. And one little footnote I want to mention is that in order to switch to the Medicare Advantage plan, all members of the family have to be Medicare eligible. So if you have a split situation where the retiree is over age 65 and the spouse is under, they would continue in their Blue Cross or Cigna plan until they're both Medicare eligible. Does anyone have any questions with regard to this potential change?
Yeah, this is Dick Chapman. I've got a couple questions, if I might.
Go ahead.
On the liability reduction, how much? So essentially, the retiree is going to move his group or her group into a fully insured Medicare Advantage plan. Is that part of the key here too? Is that
yes,
the plan's got to be fully insured, so the risk is moved out of the general plan and in basically off of Metro's books and onto an insurance company's books.
Yeah, that is one additional fact, is that it would go to a fully insured plan. It wouldn't go off of Metro's books because they still have a liability associated with the subsidy they still provide the retiree, but the risk will be mitigated somewhat.
So the financial subsidy that's now graduated in like 6 or 7 tiers for new hires would still be out there.
Are you talking about for new hires, they have a subsidy based on the service?
Correct.
That would still be there, correct.
And we'd still have the division between people with hire dates prior to, I think, 2013 and post-2013.
Yes, that'd still be there, where pre-2013 hires would get the full 75-25 split.
Okay, how are you going, what's the base number for that? I mean, 75% of what? Because you got a new premium structure.
Okay, so let me back up to the contribution. See, Humana's $50 a month. The total cost is about $200 a month.
Okay.
So that means the cost of the retiree is $50. The cost of Metro is $150 a month.
Okay, that includes the idea that these people are already in Medicare, and Medicare is being the primary coverage. So the $200 a month is basically covering the Medicare deductibles and co-payments. Deductibles, co-payments, and co-insurance.
Yes. So when you go into a Medicare Advantage plan, it's sort of a all-in-one.
I'm in a Medicare Advantage plan.
Okay, great.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just wondering how that's going to work. Okay. Let me ask you one question about where, for the purpose of accounting for the GASB liability, are the school support staff included? Are they in Metro's general books, or are they in the school system's general books?
I believe it all is encapsulated to Metro's books. Does anyone have more insight on that?
I'd like to ask the HR staff folks to find out how that's handled. I haven't looked at the Metro Comprehensive Annual Financial Report to determine whether or not the whole school system, I mean, the teachers and everybody else, are recorded in that location, or there's a separate Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for the school system. Because based on some understanding I have about how the state government records the OPEB liability for the teacher plan, which is a separate plan that school systems can be in, that liability is assigned to the employer under the plan's basically a multiple employer plan that the state runs as a giant pool. So there's like 130 school systems in that plan. But each of the school systems gets an OPEB calculation that they put on their books as opposed to putting on the state books as the plan sponsor. And the only thing I'm wondering is, does the school system have a separate CAFR, and is the OPEB liability for the support staff in that CAFR as opposed to in the general Metro Comprehensive Annual Financial Report?
Okay, just to respond, my understanding is that the school's liability is not associated with the state in any way.
Correct.
And then based on the way we provide information to Metro, I believe they do use both numbers similarly. But without pulling up the CAFR, which is the financial reporting information, I'm not able to verify that.
It's something somebody can do outside of this meeting.
Joe and Mr. Chapman, Kevin Crumbo, Director of Finance, Kevin Crumbo has his hand raised. Director Crumbo, you are recognized. Mr. Crumbo, I think you're on mute. I don't know. There you go.
Does that work? Okay.
Yes,
great.
perfect. We can hear you. Thank you.
Super. Good morning, everyone. Hey, so just very quickly, the CAFR, and for those that aren't familiar with that term, it's our comprehensive annual financial report, and it usually comes up several months after our fiscal year end. The June 30 year end, and the length of time there is really a reflection of all the information that needs to be consolidated to it. The CAFR for this last fiscal year. I'm actually reviewing this afternoon, and I expect to issue next week. So you'll have the freshest information, as the saying goes, here in a few days. With respect to what it includes, schools is consolidated to that CAFR. And just to give you a sense of size, we have, our budget every year, roughly $2.5 billion of revenues and expenses, and schools comprises about $1 billion of that. Its OPEB liabilities and so forth will be accounted for there, and there will be lots of notes in the footnote area for you to take a look at. So I think as large as this group is here, probably the most expedient thing to do is we will get you a copy of the new CAFR as it comes out. We also have an analysis that will take you back a number of years so you can see how those numbers compare. And perhaps your next meeting, we can get into the details of that as much as you like.
This is Dick Chapman. I'm probably the only one that wants to get into that at all, including the consultants.
I don't normally get many requests for the CAFR, but I have yours here, and then there's another participant on the call who has emailed me about it already. So it sounds like it's more interesting days gone by. But Mr. Chapman, I'll be glad even to work with you directly to answer your questions to the extent that you have those after you see the writings there.
Okay. This is Dick Chapman again. I have one other request. The consultants, since you prepare these documents, could you send me the most recent actuarial evaluation and the most recent experience study for the Metro pension plans? Just send them to me electronically at the risk of asking for entirely too much detail.
This is Kevin Sullivan.
Reports are available, and we can look at the experience study as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, anyone else have any questions with regard to this Medicare Advantage plan for all consideration?
Director Crumbo, you have the floor.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind Mr. Chapman of the benefits of being on this committee is if you make more than 3 detailed requests in any one meeting, you get a free pocket protector with our director.
Is this one geek calling another geek a geek? Remember, you conceded that you're going over the CAFR this afternoon.
I did.
Okay. Then we'll move on to the next bullet on the agenda, which is the removing the out-of-pocket limits out of the Metro Code. I'm going to go over the current situation. I'm going to talk about how out-of-pocket limits work in general, and also the way Metro handles their out-of-pocket limits, and then we'll talk about the impacts. So right now, the Metro Code states that the out-of-pocket limits for the PPO plan is 1,000 individual, 2,000 family. As previously discussed, these limits were set at least over 30 years ago, and they haven't changed since. And since they're in the code, the benefit board is unable to make any changes if they want to. And we're just talking about removing them, so it wouldn't immediately change the out-of-pocket limits in the plan. It would merely give the benefit board the ability to consider changes in the future. And as a reminder, that was brought up to me before, without a recommendation from the Study and Formulating Committee, no change can be made by the benefit board to these out-of-pocket limits until the next Study and Formulating Committee meets, which will be at least 5 years from now. So their hands would be tied for at least 5 years if no action is taken. So let's look at it from the point of view of a participant. The individuals are limited to paying $1,000 a year for medical services. However, Metro has a grandfathered plan, and so the individuals pay additional co-payments for office visits and prescriptions, and they're not limited to this 1,000. They're not in this 1,000. And you can see that it's 20 per visit for primary care, 30 per specialist, and the generic and brand drug refill costs are shown as well. So as a result, someone that has a high amount of claims in a year would not only pay the $1,000 out-of-pocket limit, but it would also have additional copays due to these office visits and these drugs. So you can see that an individual might have $1,000 additional, and in fact, on average, that's what they have. So they're paying close to $2,000 a year on average as a max, sort of the total spend, even though there's a $1,000 out-of-pocket limit. In a total, they're really spending about $2,000. If Metro were to change these out-of-pocket limits, they'd lose their grandfathered status, so that all of a sudden the office visits and the drug copays would be subject to this limit. As you can imagine, if that happens, Metro plan really would need to go to a $2,000, $4,000 out-of-pocket limits if copays were going to go towards these out-of-pocket limits. So that's sort of the break-even point. If Metro would want any savings, they would have to go above this $2,000, $4,000 and examples of savings I'm showing is $2,500, $5,000 limits, or even going to $3,000, $6,000, just to get some savings of either 1 or 1.7%. And just to give you a little indicator, if you left it at 1,000, 2,000 without and having the copays go to these limits, costs would increase by 3.3%. And I want to remind you now, we're not talking about making any changes. We're talking about removing it from the code so future changes can be made. And the reason we're showing these numbers, because I know in the last committee meeting we talked about maybe changing the language to 1,500 or escalating it 100 per year after that, or maybe even just doing a cost of living on this. But because of this unique feature where Metro's copays and drug copays and office visit copays are outside this out-of-pocket limits, you really need to increase the out-of-pocket limits an additional amount because of this feature would be eliminated. So we can't really go to a $1,500 out-of-pocket limit. It would have to be, if changes were ever made, it'd have to be to $2,000 to $3,000. I know I've thrown a lot of numbers at you and made a lot of points. I wanted to just tee it up to you guys to ask any questions that you have.
This is Nick Brazel. Just had a question regarding the grandfathered status. How closely do the current benefits in terms of the preventive services align with what you would have to comply with if you lost that status?
I believe the preventive care would actually, is Kelly Lewis on this call? She's more of an expert on this one particular feature.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So under the current PPO plan, there is not, as you probably know, Mr. Brazel, that with the ACA plans that chose not to remain grandfathered had to provide 100% coverage for preventive care. And the Cigna plan actually does provide that. That was just something that was in place before ACA, that it covered preventive care at 100%. But the Blue Cross plan does not, the PPO plan does not. So it covers, there's a $750 limit for preventive care. So it would be a benefit to members if the plan did lose grandfathered status in some degree, that care would be covered.
I guess really my question is just, do the numbers in here take that into consideration? Because I assume there would be an increase in cost by adding, the 100% preventive services.
The numbers, we haven't addressed it in these numbers, but it's extremely small when you talk about the major issue with regard to the high utilizers. But that specific nuance has not been considered.
Okay, I was just curious. Thank you.
This is Dick Chapman. To follow up on one of Mr. Braswell's questions, it doesn't necessarily mean by taking this off that you have to increase the cost of the employee assistance or the wellness program or whatever. From a benefit standpoint, you could leave it at $0 or $5 or whatever it is currently, and that's not considered in your analysis here. But there's nothing by removing the grandfather provision that requires the benefit board to increase the cost to the plan participant. Anybody want to take that one on?
Mr. Chapman, this is Shannon Hall.
Okay.
I agree with you. I do think that if the board were to change and elect not to have grandfathered status on the PPO plan, that it would not require the board to make any plan changes at all other than complying with the ACA components. But they wouldn't have to change any of their out-of-pocket limits if they chose not to. But they would, if they were ungrandfathered, I think they would need to comply. I'll have Kelly Lewis confirm that, comply with the other ACA provisions.
Okay.
That is correct.
Okay, so that's a positive out of all of this. It's not, it doesn't force you to do something that you don't necessarily want to do.
Correct. But all that they would not have to change office visit copays, prescription drug copays, or things like that. But if Metro makes any changes that would cause them to lose grandfathered status, and so that, you know, preventive care would be covered at 100%, which is a positive. But I think what Joe is saying is that the cost of the plan would certainly go up, because right now there's really not a true out-of-pocket maximum in the PPO plan. But if they make a change and they lose grandfathered status, all copays now, which don't count toward the out-of-pocket maximum, would have to count toward it. So I think that's kind of the what Joe was just trying to say.
Would that include pharmacy?
Yes, all prescription drug copays, all office visit copays would suddenly have to count toward the out-of-pocket maximum, whereas the design of Metro's plan now doesn't.
Okay. What about co-insurance? Let's say one of the tiers on the pharmacy plan involve co-insurance with a maximum. Would that also apply against the out-of-pocket max?
It already does. It already does.
Okay.
Well, there's not co-insurance now for prescription drugs, but the co-insurance for medical counts toward out-of-pocket. Any kind of co-insurance, if this committee added a tier that maybe have co-insurance for prescription drugs, that would count toward it.
Okay. So one of the keys here is to get rid of the general Metro in the ordinance limitation on the out-of-pocket maximum, and then to wrestle with how you're going to structure the benefits beyond that to reflect the fact that the grandfathering provision is out.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Myers, this is Kim Stagg. I have a question, if you would consider it, please.
Sure.
Your presentation here says if we do not recommend and the council does not amend the code, the cost would increase by 3.3%. Is that, in the upcoming fiscal year? And in terms of dollars, what is that cost increase to Metro, please, sir?
Let me clarify. That 3.3% would be the cost if it stayed at 1,000, 2,000 out-of-pocket limits with the copays going towards the out-of-pocket. This is nothing like that's going to happen by you taking action or not action. This is just an illustration of the additional liability that's associated with all these additional copays and office visit copays.
Okay, let's go at this from another direction then. bear with me.
Okay.
First, for starters, remember I'm a lawyer. And so as a lawyer, my preference is always to amend a code section, not completely delete it. When you start to delete code sections that have been there for decades, that is a difficult sell to a lawyer. However, I think what this committee has seen is that there is a clear need to amend that Metro code section so that instead of language adopts out-of-pocket limits that are decades old, we instead amend that code section to perhaps do something like state that out-of-pocket limits, co-pays, deductibles, and employee premiums will be put into the hands of the benefit board with perhaps approval by the Metro Code so that we can give Metro the ability to create a PPO plan that is a modern-day plan that might save employees money, that might save Metro money. So all of that, a very long-winded background to get to my question of if, and I would call on Shannon Hall to perhaps better state what the amendment to the code section might look like. But my question for you, Mr. Myers, is if we were to go down that path, put the decision-making of limits and copays and the like in the benefit board instead of some, arbitrary number in a code section that's 30-plus years old, what would be the savings to Metro and in savings to the employee that we might see? And if you can't quantify savings, at a minimum, what cost increase could we avoid by recommending that and seeing it happen? Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense, but I want to reiterate what I said before. Removing it from the code itself doesn't cause any savings or cost increase. That's not a trigger on any savings.
That's right. Ultimately, the benefit, if we put the decision in the hands of the benefit board, they would have to make changes to the PPO plan. It would need to look like a different medical plan. And then either cost avoidance or cost savings ultimately would be derived when that plan was in place with employees. Is that your point?
Yes. Yes, the point is, first of all, the point is to say that any code change or removal has no impact on the plan. It only provides flexibility. And the other point of this slide would be to show you that if you don't want to remove it, you want to change it, it would need to be changed considerably more than the $1,500 that was mentioned on the previous meeting. $2,000 would be sort of the break-even point, and to have savings, it would need to be more than $2,000, as shown. $2,500, $3,000, or even a little more. So it's just to quantify that removal would work, but if you're going to put a fixed dollar, it would need to be considerably higher than the numbers we were throwing around at the last meeting.
I understand, and that is an excellent point, and I am very glad to have that information. And so jumping ahead to what the recommendations might look like out of this committee and how we could explain out of this committee the potential value of those recommendations. If the recommendation was to amend this code section to give flexibility with regard to the PPO, assuming that was adopted and assuming the benefits board changed the current PPO to bring it up to some modern day good plan as opposed to, this unusual no deductible very low out-of-pocket limit plan, what is the benefit Metro ultimately could derive from that? Can we quantify that?
Yep. Okay. So yeah, I do have it. If you look at the slide 10 I have on the screen, if, for example, Study Formulating decided to remove the language and the benefit board were to increase it, remove the out-of-pocket language.
Okay.
And then if subsequently, if the benefit board decided to make some changes, and let's say, for example, they changed the out-of-pockets to 3,000, 6,000, 3,000 individual, 6,000 family, with obviously co-pays would now go towards this limit. If they made that change, it'd be a 1.7% savings on the premium.
Okay, and 1.7% of what? Can you put that in dollar terms for me in total?
Yeah. So the way I'm looking at it is, if you talk about the rate that a participant pays, I don't have the rates in front of me, but let's say they pay $700 a month for a family. If you raise the out-of-pocket the rate would go down by 1.7%, so it might go from $700 to $690 a month, let's say.
And that's a savings to the employee, right?
To both. Remember, right. Metro splits the cost 75% Metro, 25% retiree, employee or retiree. So the 1.7% would be a savings on both the Metro cost and the employee or retiree cost.
Good. Okay. I understand. And so if we extrapolate that number down, 1.7% reduction again per month against $700 for all employees in this PPO over 12 months, are we talking some significant savings in total?
Well, when you make changes, it's never just one thing. Whether or not it's significant depends on a lot of issues. Making budgets, sometimes an increase over year could be 8%, let's say. Sometimes you want to tweak the plan a little bit to save that 1.7% so it doesn't go by as much. It's just a matter of flexibility to make these changes. Whether it's significant or not, I'll defer to the individual who has to pay these premiums, but it's just to give the Metro flexibility in the design.
Thank you. That's all that I have. I appreciate your help.
Sure. Welcome.
This is Dick Chapman. I'd like to, as a non-lawyer, I'd like to make an argument here, since we're starting to actually talk with each other about what we think. And I'm the person who had the discussion about $1,500 in one of these meetings, because the FOP representative made a point at one of our meetings about not increasing the out-of-pocket maximum too rapidly. And I wanted to kind of take that into account. The other thing is, remember that the Metro Benefits Board has 5 employee members and 5 members who are basically representing the administration, including the personnel chief and the finance director. Let me make a couple other points. Every employee pays premium. All taxpayers pay taxes that pay part of the premiums. So everybody's a stakeholder here. In addition to that, the benefit plan has changed in what it's spending money for over time. 30 years ago, pharmacy benefits were not nearly as prevalent as far as what they represented as a portion of the total benefit spend as they are today. Advanced imaging and things like that aren't the same today that they were 30 years ago. In addition to that, this is an upside protection for people who are chronically or critically ill. This kind of out-of-pocket maximum deals with people who have children that are premature births, people who are chronically ill, heart cases, those types of things. It's not somebody this won't have an impact on somebody who gets a cold twice a year and goes and gets an antibiotic to take care of that. This is protection for the sake of argument, less than 5% of the plan members, that's provided by all the plan members. Is that a fair statement, Joe, do you think? Generally?
That's a fair statement, but I believe the percentage of people who hit the limit is a little higher than 5%. I believe there was around 15 to 20%.
Okay, I wanted to be conservative, and I've seen numbers that are 10 years old relate to some of the work I did with the state plan. Okay, so I didn't want to exaggerate, but this is, under today's Metro plan, this is a pretty low amount to get to compared to what is prevalent in the overall scheme of life with other plans.
Yes.
And just to make a point, your assessment here says just to hold constant with what the benefits look like today and making this change and losing the grandfather provision would require the benefit board to basically go to 2,000, 4,000 to be constant. Not to really shift any more expense over to this portion of the plan members, but to remain constant would have to go to 2,000, 4,000.
Correct, because the typical high utilizer is already paying 2,000.
Right.
Because of all the drugs they have.
Because of the division that you've got between the grandfather stuff and what would typically happen if the grandfather provision was not there. Right?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, now, I think what Ms. Stagg was trying to get to is how much is Metro putting in each year to fund the plan? Because that's where the 1% and the 1.7% comes in as well, because what is that number?
Well, I believe the cost is in hundreds of millions. I want to say about $250 million is the total claim spend.
Right.
In a given year. So 1% of 250 million is 2.5 million.
Right. And that's going to happen every single year. And it's
correct. Yeah, that's a great point of view to look from Metro's point of view. I was phrasing it from the actual participant's point of view.
Right. Well, and it's important. I mean, $10 or $12 a month may be important to a participant, particularly if they're very healthy and they have hardly any expenses from the plan. I mean, that the plan's paying. And yet, at the same time, holding constant at $2,000 and $4,000 isn't really having an impact on the chronically ill 10 to 15% of the people who are out there. I mean, that's just, in your estimation, holding constant.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, it'll look like the part of the problem here is how that is perceived, not how that is in reality, and explaining reality to people who are going to perceive a big number. And that includes the benefit board. And the truth of the matter is, if the council starts getting antsy about peeling out that particular provision, somebody's going to have to talk with them too. I'm done.
Okay.
Hi, this is Cleo Rucker. Thank you all first for such great dialogue and such great information that was provided as it relates to, the change here and the possible change here. One of the things that I would like us to consider, us 4 board members or committee members who will be coming forward with the recommendation is what we will be leaving here with is a recommendation of a possible change here in this language. And I can say, speaking from my point of view here, is that I definitely don't feel that the board and Metro as a whole being restricted by language from 30 years ago, which I have yet to hear how the language was really created and for what reason. I feel that the Metro being restricted at this time continues to be an issue. Now, for me at least. Recognizing that, I also recognize that what we will be going forward with is a recommendation for one way or the other. What we recommend may be implemented. What we recommend may not be. And considering we are really dealing with the I guess the clock is really ticking here as it relates to how much time we have to come out with all of our recommendations. I think we may kind of want to talk about kind of where we are, not only where we stand with this this recommendation here, but all other recommendations. And I'm not saying this is one of those low-hanging fruit, but I think we do need to kind of get an idea of where we're leaning at this point. And I don't know. I mean, if we are needing additional information, or if our questions were answered by Joe and Kevin, that it's great. But I think trying to start moving to that place of what are kind of our thoughts as it relates to some of these, like the out-of-pocket limits, and just where we're leaning, I think will be very important, because I'm very concerned that we're looking to recommend things that are extremely specific, that we and if there's some reason and rationale, I'm not saying we don't do that, but I'm concerned that we're maybe going off into areas and spaces that really are to be decided by the board. So I wanted to get your thoughts on some of that.
I absolutely agree with what you said, Mr. Rucker, and I think the sooner we get to the Excel spreadsheet that was circulated to us with the potential recommendations, the better. So we can start either adopting those and agreeing with them, putting pen to paper, so then we can make sure we have our recommendations done by the end of this month.
Sorry, was someone else going to speak? So, Joe, I know you had to go through some more of your presentation. So, if no one has any other questions about the out-of-pocket limits, I would recommend we continue to move forward.
Okay. The last topic that I'm discussing is a suggestion that was made at an earlier meeting is let's talk about 3 or 4 tiers. And currently Metro has 2 tiers, so we're going to discuss the possibility of changing that. I'm going to go over the cost sharing, some survey information, and the cost impact. So under the current PPO design, there's a $10 copay for a generic prescription and $30 for brand. And if you look at the current distribution of the types of prescriptions that are out there, you can see a high weighting towards generic. And in fact, Metro does have very high generic participation for those drugs that can be filled as a generic. And then you have preferred, non-preferred, and specialty. Currently, Metro charges $30 for any of those non-generic options. Looking at survey information, only 15% of companies have 1 to 2 tiers. 85% have gone to the 3+ tier structure. So certainly Metro has an uncommon design when it comes to survey information. Typically on the survey information, it's for 2 tiers, it's 11 generic, 33 brand. And that's very similar to the $10 and $30 that Metro charges. So they're in line with regard to the 2-tier design. When you go to 4 tiers, they stick with approximately the 1030 for the generic and preferred, but then it escalates further to about $59 for non-preferred and $123 for specialty drugs. So we considered changing the plan design for the PPO plan to go to 3-tier and 4-tier. 3-tier further increasing the non-preferred and specialty to $60 copay, and the 4-tier taking it one step further, going to $120 specifically for specialty. As you can see, the savings would be for the 3-tier 0.2 to 0.3%, and for 4-tier 0.3 to 0.5%. The savings is low mainly because Metro has very low experience with those higher level tiers of drugs. If you look back at this, only 4% of the people get non-preferred and 1.3% get specialty. So increasing the co-pays on that amount does have a small impact.
This is Nick Brazel. I just wanted to point out, just for the committee members' benefit, that I had requested separately some information about the prescription drug costs, especially as they apply to the specialty drugs. And by claims, it's 1.3%, but by your actual dollars, I mean, for the PPO plan, you're talking about 43% of all the prescription drug dollars spent are for specialty. And then for the Cigna plan, it's 47%. I mean, you're talking about $35 million per year on that for 1% of the claims. So in my opinion, anything you can do to shift that cost somewhat, because I mean, ultimately everybody else is paying for that. So
right, that makes sense. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Dick.
I was going to say, I'm just saying that to say that I would be in favor of pursuing one of these 3 or 4 tier designs. And I would also say that I would almost be in favor of even reducing the co-payment for the generic, just as further incentive, because I know we've done that with some of our client funds and gotten it down to even like 5% or $5, and it has shifted, more towards the generic utilization.
Hi, Nick, this is Cleo. Can you repeat those percentages and those numbers that you just...
Yes, for the PPO plan, the specialty drugs for 2020, well, I guess that's just through November, were 43% of the total spend. And then for the Cigna fund, or the Cigna plan, it was 47%.
Thank you.
This is Dick Chapman. How long have the co-payments for the generic and for the 2-tier design, how long have they been in effect? Does anybody know?
I do not know the history of that.
If the staff folks could give us that, I think that might be helpful, because to a certain extent, I think we're making a point that the real money is out there in the specialty drugs. But if the co-payments have been constant for the sake of argument for 10 years, since a lot of the prescriptions are in that category, that might be a place where a small increase in the copay is appropriate as well. Because assuming drugs are getting no less expensive, you're not showing the average payout by the plan for each of the generics either. If you know what I mean. If, for example, you're going and getting a generic drug and your $11 represents 5% or 10% of the overall cost of the 90-day fill, that might be a place to consider, again, recommending at least a review of the benefit structure. I'm done.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, you made a great point. I don't know the cost sharing, but addressing specifically the specialty, that could be a wide range of costs. If you have a specialty medicine that's, it could cost, let's say $500 a month. In reality, whether or not you charge the participant 30 or 60 or 120, it's not going to impact Metro's costs that much. Because as a percentage of the true cost of the drug, it's so low. But there would be some savings as shown, either, a fraction of a percent.
Well, and the other thing is, part of the dilemma is there's not necessarily a substitute at a lower tier.
That's right. Yeah, when we run these numbers, in addition to changing the copays, we also take into effect how behavior will be changed by the copays. But with the specialty drugs, there's not much behavior change. If you need it, you need it.
Yeah. Well, and for some people, it won't matter. I mean, higher waged workers are going to be in a position where another $10 or $20 for a specialty drug prescription is not going to impact their behavior at all. What they're going to say is, okay, we're not going out to dinner one night a week or one night a month because we got to pay for an increased copay, and the drug's more important than the social event.
So that's the part on the drug copays. For next steps, I think we're going to handle that near the end of the meeting with regard to that spreadsheet of open items. But if anyone else has any questions on the 3 items I presented, please let me know.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe. Kevin, we will flip it over to you so you can share your presentation on your actuarial costs. Let me make sure, Sade, can you make sure he has got that role?
I'm sorry, who's the presenter now?
Kevin Sullivan, please.
All right, Kevin, you now have the ball. So at the bottom where it says share content, you can share your screen. There you go.
Thank you very much. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the screen. So what we're talking about now is the pension impact of the 911 operators potentially adding this group to the public safety portion of the plan. So the topics we want to cover is a summary of the proposed plan change, a little bit of the data statistics on the group that would be covered by this, the cost impact, and then some other considerations in such a change. So the proposed plan change would be to cover the 911 operators in the public safety portion of the plan. Now, if you're looking through the plan document, I know we have maybe some attorneys on the call. I don't think the term public safety appears in the plan document. That's my more general term for this. It's referred to in the plan as fire and police credited service, section 3.37 of the plan. And included would be the following positions within the emergency telecommunication group. That would be the officer trainee, officers 1 through 4 position, the trainer position, supervisor, and manager. And this change would be to move the these group of positions from the general government portion of the plan to the fire and police portion of the plan. And this would include all past and future service for this group. So even their past service that to date they believed was under the general government portion of the plan would move to fire and police service under this change. So a little bit about the difference between the general government and the fire and police portion of the plan. First, starting with average earnings, this is exactly the same for the two, but this is just to provide the baseline for average earnings, which is the 60 consecutive months of earnings, which produce the highest average. For general government, the retirement benefit per year accredited service is 1.75%. For the fire and police service, it's 2% for the first 25 years and 1.75% for each additional year. So slightly better, what we call benefit multiplier for the fire and police group. Now, the normal retirement date is also different for the two groups. For general government, it's age plus service equals 85 points, but not before age 60. For the fire and police group, it's age plus service equal to 75, but not before age 53. Now, this normal retirement date is actually determined for everyone when they're hired. So it's basically looking at your projected age and projected service when you would reach 85 points for general government or 75 points for fire and police. So for many folks in general government, their normal retirement date is age 60, and for many in fire and police, it's age 53. But for those who are hired maybe a little later in their careers or in their working careers, it would get pushed back a little beyond that, the age 60 and age 53 to the point where they would have the required number of total points. The early retirement date is also different for the two groups. For general government, it's age 50 with 10 years of service. For fire and police, it's age 45 with 10 years of service. And if you commence your benefit before your normal retirement date, that your benefit is reduced. It's reduced 4% for each of the first 5 years and 8% for each additional year for both of those two groups. So in totality, if you look at these differences really, I don't necessarily view it as the fire and police is a better pension. I view it more as the fire and police group is allowed to earn a comparable pension over a slightly shorter service period. Because in general, when you have a fire and police pension group versus a general government, the idea is that you want to have, because the fire and police service tends to be more physically, emotionally, mentally taxing, you want to keep that group younger, so you allow them to earn a comparable benefit over a shorter period of time. So if you compare these two groups, if you think about a fire and police pension over a 30-year period, the type of benefit that would be earned, it would take a general government employee about 3.5 additional years to earn the same benefit. So you're really looking at about a 2.5 to 4 year service difference in terms of the additional general government time it would take to earn the same pension as it would take a fire and police officer. So when we're looking at valuing the cost of any change, there's a number of assumptions that go into this, and there are some differences and similarities between the general government and fire and police. We actually use the same mortality assumption for both groups, and this may be a little counterintuitive. Most folks tend to think of fire and police as having higher rates of mortality, but our review of the Metro data for a number of years has shown very similar mortality experience for general government and fire and police retirees. As you might expect, most of the mortality is happening at the more advanced ages when individuals are actually retired. But for fire and police and general government, we use the same mortality assumption. We also use the same pay increase assumption, and that is based on age. It's generally a declining scale that's higher when you're younger, lower, much closer to inflation when you're older and closer to retirement age. But those two assumptions are the same for both groups. So we have a number of assumptions that are different for the fire and police. Lower turnover assumption for fire and police. Our past experience with both populations have shown that the fire and police group tends to have significantly lower turnover, really from date of hire through up until they reach retirement eligibility. So fire and police group tend to stick with their positions much longer than general government. Also, the fire and police, as we would expect, do have earlier retirement ages compared to general government. This is just, again, based on our analysis of historical data for the plan. Also, the fire and police group has higher disability, as might be expected. And all of these assumptions, whether they're the same or different, factor into valuing the cost of moving this population from the general government to the fire and police, because we would continue these same assumptions for this group when they move to fire and police. So we would now be assuming lower turnover for this group, early retirement, kind of commensurate with the different pension provisions, and higher disability. Now, there's certainly an argument to be made that these things have already been true for this group. I think that's not true, as we'll talk about in a moment, with turnover, but certainly with retirements and disability, that may have historically been true for this group as well. So on the next slide, just a little bit more detail about the distribution of assumed retirement ages for this population. So the orange bars, if we look at this group as continuing to be general government employees, the orange bars represents how we think this group would retire over time. And you'll notice that the largest number of retirements would be right at age 60, where that group is. Most of that group is their normal retirement date. But we also tend to see some retirements just past age 60. Also, age 65 is still a very common retirement date for individuals in the general government. And these assumptions are derived from our experience with the entire general government population over a period of years. Now, the blue bars represent how this group might retire as fire and police employees, where we have not necessarily age 53 as a more common date, but age 54, 57, really in the late 50s and early 60s tends to be a very common retirement date for fire and police. But in general, you'll notice that the blue bars representing fire and police assumed retirements tend to be earlier by about 3 years, that 3-year difference again for fire and police versus the later retirements for general government. So moving into some data statistics on this group. So the number of employees that were in these positions in December of this year when we collected data on this population was 170 individuals. Now, if we look at the number who were among these same positions who were eligible for the plan as of the last completed valuation day, July 1, 2019, there were 142 individuals in those same positions. The number hired since September 1, 2019, we've determined as 44 individuals. So going back to that issue of turnover, this group does appear to have significantly higher turnover than the general government population overall, which again we mentioned was higher than fire and police. And again, this is historical. That doesn't represent anything that may or may not be happening in the department now. These are more just historical trends on the data. So if we look at the status of these two groups, a little of this is the same for whether we consider them general government or we consider them fire and police. Their age at hire is age 28 on average. Their current age on average is age 40. And that's about 5 to 6 years lower than the general government group as a whole, where the average age tended to be around 45, 46. Now, if we assume these individuals as general government employees, the average retirement age for this population would be about age 61. If we consider them fire and police, age 58. So again, you'll see that 3-year difference popping up again. Their current service for the population is 12 years of past service. And the future service, which really takes them from current age to the average retirement age, is 21 as general government employees and 18 for fire and police. So again, if we assume them as fire and police employees, they're going to earn a higher benefit, but over an expected slightly shorter service period. So moving on to the estimated cost for this proposed change. And we look at this a couple of different ways. We look at the increased liability, and this liability is really, there's two components of this. Part of this is the past service liability, recognizing that 12 years of average past service the individuals have, that would flip from general government to fire and police service. But then also their future service would be fire and police as opposed to general government. So the increase in the overall plan liability for those individuals would be $11.2 million. And that's an increase of about 0.3% in the roughly $3.7 billion total liability of the plan. So as a percentage of total liability, relatively small. The increase in the recommended contribution each year would be $1.1 million, and that's about a 1.4% increase in the total recommended contribution for the pension plan. And in the lower box, most folks tend to look at the contribution rate for the Metro plan as a rate of pay for the aggregate group. So our last recommended rate, and this I'll mention, this is before a slight adjustment that the benefit board makes, and the council continues of keeping the rate at a level rate of 12.34% as it has been for several years now. But this baseline recommended rate was 12.057 as of the last valuation. This change would increase that by 0.172% of total compensation, taking the adjusted recommended rate to 12.229%. Okay, some other considerations. As I mentioned earlier, the 911 operators appear to have a high historic level of turnover, certainly higher than the current general government population overall. In general, you would expect a change like this to help reduce the level of turnover, because this is a better benefit that would tend to at least be a factor in individuals' decision whether or not to stay in their position. The fire and police covered group is expected to have a lower turnover than the general government. I will say, though, that some significant portion of the existing turnover is happening in the first 10 years where those individuals are non-vested. So that's always a question of, is a change like this where they really have to stay 10 years to get the benefit of the change in their future pension? Is it enough to keep them there for that 10-year vesting period? And there, of course, there's a question as to whether the proposed change would lead 911 operators to retire at an earlier age. Early retirements tend to be more costly for the plan. If folks tend to stay to a very extreme high age before they retire, that tends to be less costly for the plan, because their period in retirement will be smaller, and their monthly benefit will be higher. As the longer they wait to retire, the length of time they get the benefit may be shorter, and therefore may ultimately reduce the cost of the plan. So that's something that's yet to be seen. Does this change to the fire and police pension cause a change in the retirement rates for this population? And so that brings me to the end of the prepared comments. So just want to open it up for any questions anyone might have.
This is Dick Chapman. We've gotten a fair amount of information from this particular agency about this particular proposal. One of the things I'd like to know is, with a new hire, I mean, you've observed that there's a high turnover during the first 10 years. New hires are going to go through a period of training. I quite honestly don't know how long that is, but new hires for policemen and firemen are going to go through training and all that kind of stuff. So is this group. Is there a significant churn here in the first year or two as the new hires find out what this job is really like, so that you're doing an early churn as opposed to thinking somebody's going to work at this job for 5 years? Are they going to discover that this doesn't agree with them as far as an occupation early in the game? And do your numbers, I mean, I understand you're looking at the 10-year benchmark because that's when people become vested. So if you don't hit the 10-year benchmark, from an actuarial standpoint, you don't care if they leave in the first 6 months, 12 months, or 48 months. Do you have any idea, though, how much of a churn there is on short term here? Or did you have a chance to look at that?
That's not something I looked at from an actuarial standpoint, because you're exactly correct. We're more focused on kind of the long career. And if your objective here is to try to mitigate turnover in that first 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, probably a pension change is not the key tool for doing that. I don't know if anyone else from HR or anyone else on the call may have more information about that specific issue.
Chairman Rucker, this is Steve Martini, the director of the department. I can answer that.
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Mr. Chapman, it's a great question you asked, and something we looked at in the first few months of my arrival here in spring. We see on average about 7 years is when we see folks leaving the department. So they come, they join us, they stay for 5, 6, 7 years. And around that 7-year mark is where they're deciding, can I keep doing this for another 23 or 28 years, or is there something else for me to do? We're trying to address that a variety of ways, engaging our folks in leadership opportunities in other areas, but about 7 years is when we lose the majority of our folks.
This is Dick Chapman again. Let me ask Mr. Martini a question. Would an active employee assistance program that focused on your folks be something that's meaningful? I noticed that the material that was included with last night's transmittal had a fair amount of discussion about that. And that's something that you may want to raise as opposed to us, but we may want to raise it too.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually participate in 2 different employee assistance programs. One's offered through a Metro government, and then another specific to public safety employees called PASS. And both of those are available to our employees, and we actively engage with chaplains and then members of those programs with on-staff peer support counselors to identify those moments of trauma. Really what we're talking about here is not the individual instances, but those cumulative stress or paratraumatic stress moments identified in some of the research. These moments of exposures over multiple years is where we're seeing the challenges.
Yeah, at the risk of being a double geek, I read most of your stuff last night.
Fantastic. I appreciate that.
I'm done.
Yes, this is Christina Hickey. I would like to recognize Councilwoman Sharon Hurt.
Good morning. Thank you very, very much. I just wanted to ask a question, and Mr. Martini, you may be able to answer it, or HR. Is it a true statement that that benefits are very impactful to sustain employment and help reduce turnover rate when there is a pleasing and satisfactory benefit package available to employees? Thank you.
I would think so, but I'm going to defer to Director Hall, who has much more experience in that from a Metro government perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Martini. Thank you, Council Lady Hurt. I'll try to share some of it data-driven, some of it just experience-driven, I think, and I'll certainly look to my team to see if they have additional comments or different thoughts. I think there's been a lot of discussion, I think, in my time here about the value of benefits, especially as public sector tends to have a richer benefit system than private sector. And I think there has at least been a perception over the years that people have valued benefits differently and at times less now than they used to. I will say that my experience doesn't necessarily bear that out. I think my experience is that people are still very interested in striking a really positive balance between compensation and benefits. I know that's been kind of a trend for the private sector, but I do believe that they're having a comprehensive benefit system is still quite advantageous and desired, I think, by significant portions of our population. That's my general experience. I will say that the workforce insight assessment that was shared with the Study and Formulating Committee and the Employee Benefit Board really tried to gauge how people felt about a lot of their benefits and some that are benefits but not part of the traditional benefit system like paid family leave and EAP programs. And one of the top concerns coming out of our metro population as to what keeps you up at night is the ability to retire. It was one of the top concerns that was raised by our metro full-time population in that workforce insight assessment from 2019. So I think my overall experience is that my experience, even though I know that's different for others, is that I think employees that come to the metropolitan government still value a comprehensive benefit system. I do believe that our population values the thing that they worry about is the ability to retire. So I do think that there is value in how people perceive Metro's pension and retirement benefits. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. It's very, very helpful. And I just want to also bring to the attention, I know in Mr. Martini's documentation that he submitted, he talked about the Christmas bombing that we had. And while we were focused on that one bombing, his office had 8 reportings of potential bombings. So I think that while we look at the physical strengths that is on police and fire people, firefighters, I think that we have historically overlooked the mental stress that has been associated with these jobs. I think that it is far time for us to recognize the level of stress that these first responders are subjected to, and I think it is a fair thing, but this is small compared to what it is that they provide for us each and every day. And because we are not in it, I don't think that we have the relationship or the relevance of it. But someone like Mr. Martini, who is in this and has been, can clearly state that. And also in one of the documents, the first line was about being on attack. Can you imagine? And just looking at the outcome of yesterday at our nation's capital, I believe that this is the least that we can do for our 911 operators. And I would encourage you all, and hopefully the information that you receive would inspire you to do something that will be fitting for the work that these individuals provide for us on a long-term basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Hurt.
Thank you to Mr. Martini and Councilwoman Hurt. Are there any other questions for Mr. Sullivan on his presentation?
I would like to, excuse me, but I would like to thank Mr. Sullivan. I think that his presentation was it was beautifully laid out and very detailed. And I certainly appreciate the time and effort that went into it, as well as the time and effort that Mr. Martini has done, because I know there were some other things of discussion that Mr. Martini has worked to provide some follow-up information with. So thank you.
Thank you for that feedback.
Thank you both to Kevin and Joe for your presentations. I think this is a good segue into our second item on the agenda, which is the additional information from the Department of Emergency Communications. Sade, if you could move that presenter role to Mr. Martini. Mr. Martini, I'm not for sure if you would like to share any of that information that the committee received prior to this meeting, but I will go ahead and just let you have that opportunity if you would like to, or if you would just prefer to speak to the additional information. I know there were several attachments and documents that we did distribute to the committee for their review. But I will turn it over to Mr. Martini, Director Martini, or to Councilwoman Sharon Hurt to address the additional information from the Department of Emergency Communications.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hickey. Yes, I do appreciate the opportunity, and I will share just some of the highlighted sections of the material shared prior to this meeting. We did reach out to do some research, finding good research done in the last 5 to 7 years as it relates to the impact of this job and the stress of this job, both mentally and physically, on public safety telecommunicators around the country. One from the Northern Illinois University and another from a university in Washington. You see some here, I've got some highlighted on this screen. the paratraumatic distress and paratraumatic distress just being that cumulative overtime distress. And I think Councilmember Hurt's assessment there of our Christmas morning, not to opportunize such an incident, but I think it shows a good picture of what we're talking about, right? We had 6 officers respond to 2nd Avenue in downtown to one bombing. As a result of multiple phone calls, we received reporting 8 and a variety of reports, including an assumption that a helicopter had crashed into the Nissan Stadium. There was an assumption that the courthouse had been bombed, a report that the UBS building had collapsed, and then multiple reports in Antioch and Donaldson, 8 to 13 miles away from the blast site, of people reporting blasts or explosions in their neighborhoods, just not able to comprehend that the sound that they heard that was so loud and so forceful close to their house was so far away from their house. And all of those reports have to be vetted and worked through and responders sent. So there are a lot of firefighters and a lot of officers and medics dispatched Saturday or Friday morning 2 weeks ago to research all of those reports to determine that we only had one. So for about a 15-minute period, right, our folks thought there was a broad attack on Davidson County and not just the downtown area. And that's just a picture of what it looks like inside of our environment always, is that multiple reports. My experience in 16 years is for every one call we dispatch, there's 2 other calls that we receive and process that don't get dispatched, that don't result in flashing lights and sirens. So there's about 3 times the work that's being done inside of the building to vet through and determine what should go on. So that's really the conversation here in the research we've identified that's talking about that paratraumatic overtime distress. 7 to 19% of our folks compared to 7.8% of the general population. So it's about 2 to 3 times that number. We're heavier in PTSD symptoms and experiences than fire departments, according to this study, and about the same as that experienced by law enforcement officers. Some of the other that we noticed, we're seeing a measurable increase in depression, disassociation, neuroticism, anger, dysregulation. The PTSD symptoms there, again, you see here where we're greater than this sample than firefighters by about double, 6.4% compared to 3.5%, and then on the same equivalent as police officers, and yet another study. This psychopathology here speaks to fatigue and indecision over time. And I think that's important as we talk about cardiovascular risk, and again, noted down here some of the physical impacts. In this, just kind of a cortisol reaction, when you have a stress response, the normal body reaction is your body is flooded with cortisol to increase your heart rate, increase your blood flow, and give you the opportunity to make that decision. Are you staying where you are you fighting, or are you running? What we don't have the opportunity to do inside of dispatch when we have that natural response, that cortisol reaction, and our body floods with this extra glucose to give us the energy to make that quick decision, is to then run down the street or pick up the fire hose and fight the fire or chase the suspect and burn that cortisol that was rushed into our body out. And that cortisol, untouched, left in the body, creates all sort of issues, including diabetes, weight gain, blood sugar imbalances, immune system suppression, gastrointestinal problems, all sorts of things. And again, we're looking at these things over time. Not such a big deal to have that once or twice or 3 times, but as we look at some of our team members who come and stay with us for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, there is that moment that they say, I've gained 50 pounds in the first year and a half of coming into this dispatch environment because I'm seated, I'm sedentary for 8 to 12 hours a day, and I have this cortisol rush multiple times a day as we're dealing with that stress response and the associated calls. And how do we deal with that, right? How do we accommodate that over time? So I think that paratraumatic stress that's identified here again, paratraumatic reaction to stress and association, is really important. Kind of highlights what we're talking about, right? Not just the mental, but also the physical impacts of this particular job. That's a summary. Some of the highlights there, and I shared that as well from those same reports.
Pardon my interruption, Director Martini. I don't know if you're, I can't see anything that you're sharing. I don't know if you were trying to share. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because if you want to share some additional information, I just want to, there you go. Perfect. I just want to make sure as you share it, it's wonderful information. So if you would like to share, we would like to to see it if that's what you would like. So thank you.
No problem. That's just what I was referencing here as I was going along, just referencing some of these studies, right? This one here that said we're 7 and 19% experiencing PTSD, which is about triple that of the general population in a 12-month period. We're on the same level as law enforcement. Mentioned again here, greater in our study than what firefighters see, 3.5% in firefighters to 6.4% in dispatchers, and about equivalent with law enforcement. And then the other here is speaking to the psychopathology of fatigue and indecision being an impact over time, and some of those other aspects we were talking about here, the paratraumatic reactions and distress association, and then some of that impact that does speak to cardiovascular risk and the cortisol flow and increases that impact the general health of the dispatcher. Thank you for pointing that out. I think that hits all my points. Material shared. I appreciate Council Members Hurt's discussion of that Christmas morning scenario because again, I do think that highlights very well just the reaction, right? That multiple calls in the one center that resulted in one call on the news, but multiple calls and multiple responses inside of our building. I'm available to receive any questions or discuss anything further.
Mr. Martini, I just want to thank you for putting all this information together and providing this and leading such a crucial department here. So thank you again for this.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Any additional questions for Director Martini or Councilwoman Sharon Hurd? I'm just kind of looking for raised hands and I don't see any. Again, Director Martini, thank you very much. And Councilwoman Sharon Hurd, we appreciate all the information in the presentation today. If there are no more additional questions, let's move on to item number 3. And this stems from questions from one of our committee members. They had asked for some information, and because it is such good information, we wanted to share this general information with the whole committee. Hopefully you've had a chance to review it. Does anybody have any questions, or is there anything anyone would like to discuss on the questions from the committee member that Deloitte has put the answers towards and was received? If so, Deloitte is available for questions.
This is Nick Brazel. I was the one that requested requested all this information. One thing that I thought of that I'd meant to ask, is there any kind of utilization management for the specialty drugs?
Yes, this is Kelly Lewis with Deloitte, and I don't have all those that I can share with you now, but I know that there are utilization programs with both of the plans, the PPO plan and the Choice Fund plan.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions or discussion surrounding the questions from the committee member? If not, Sade, if you don't mind handing me the presenter role. Thank you. I am not. What we will go over next is item number 4, the overview of items presented thus far at the Study and Formulating Committee. You should all have the spreadsheet that was distributed with the updated actuarial costs and recommendations. I will open the floor and give this back to Mr. Rucker as I figure out how to share. I've never shared, nor the liaison to this. So I'm trying to figure out the share on this. myself.
Christina, at the bottom where it says share content.
Correct, I'm on there.
And then you can choose either an application or a screen depending on what you're trying to share.
Okay. Let's see what happens, guys.
Oh, okay.
Let me try. In here. All right, let's see. Y'all let me know if y'all can see the Excel spreadsheet.
We can, Christina.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So this is the updated Excel spreadsheet with the items requested for study, purpose and source of study, items presented, possible recommendations, updated with the estimated actuarial cost savings, and the decision deadline as we have put as February 1, as the final report needs to be issued no later than February 17th, 18th of 2021. So I will hand it back to Chair Rucker to see where the committee would like to go or discussions they would like to have regarding possible recommendations or information that's already been presented.
Thank you, Christina. I would like to just talk with the committee as it relates to the next steps and the use of the time that we have left today and next steps for any future sessions. I first of all want to thank everyone for the information that was provided today and all the information that has been provided in the past. My question, I guess, to the committee right now, the first question I have is, does any committee member feel that there is information that is still needed before we can have start a dialogue about the items that are listed today? Is there anything outstanding that you feel you need to have answered, or still some information that needs to be provided before we can, really start jumping into, what are the, low-hanging fruit that we could just kind of move forward, or having deeper dialogue on some issues?
Mr. Rucker, this is Kim Stagg. I certainly don't need any further information, and I fully support us focusing most of our time on this Excel spreadsheet.
Mr. Chapman, are there any thoughts from you?
I had some other thoughts earlier in correspondence that I sent to the staff, but I think I'm in pretty good shape on where we are with some of these things. Just so you know, I've put together some material for the staff to consider on the communication relative to financial planning and those kind of things, and I think the staff wants to look at that.
When you say the staff wants to look at it, are you using
the HR people?
Oh, okay, got you. Okay. Mr. Brazel, I want to get your thoughts on, do you feel that you have enough information to start the conversation, or are there some things that you need some information on, or that you're waiting for?
I feel like I have everything I need to start having a dialogue about this.
Okay, I think, well, if there's no objections, I think we can start with jumping into the first item that is listed on the spreadsheet. And thank you, Christina and HR, for putting together this spreadsheet. With that being the case, the first item deals with the medical care. And it is a recommendation regarding a lower cost employee health plan option that delivers substantive health and wellness benefits for our employees. For example, preventive care oriented high deductible plans as requested in the Employee Workforce Insight assessment for the survey. I would just, I guess, open the floor to thoughts as it relates to how we move forward. This specifically deals with removal of the language that specifies the out-of-pocket maximum, the PPO plan's out-of-pocket maximum. So I'll open the floor up for conversation on this.
Mr. Rucker, if I might lean on Shannon Hall to share any thoughts about how this recommendation might be worded, to change it to an amendment to the Metro Code.
That would be great. Ms. Hall, if you can help us out here, and that would be really good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Stagg. Ms. Stagg, I heard your comments and comments from other committee members, and I think your concerns are well-founded, that as an attorney, removal of a language can be a little nerve-wracking, and I think also give the folks that are impacted a perspective that something is trying to be eliminated, and that is certainly not the intent here. I think as we've covered over the last several meetings, and the intent that we've talked about, really this is unusual that these provisions would be codified in Title III of the Metro Code. It would not be unusual for the Employee Benefit Board to determine medical plan provisions, and as appropriate, some of those provisions, and these are some big ones, would typically be approved like our other medical plans through a resolution, still legally enforceable, so there'd still be like a council oversight. But as we've discussed before, our Employee Benefit Board is historically and continues to be a very employee-friendly board. And the intent here is really to give the Employee Benefit Board, who's the governing board of benefits, who really does this as their passion and representation, both for the people that they represent or those that are mayor appointed or by virtue of office like me. I think the goal is that we amend the code in a way that allows the board and the council the flexibility to determine appropriate deductibles, co-insurance, and out-of-pocket maximums that make sense for the employees and pensioners that we serve. So I like your suggestion about not necessarily removing the language, because I think that gives a number of committee members, as they've kind of outlined, pause. But I do like the concept and suggestion that, and maybe the way the recommendation, I'm kind of just speaking out loud, so I certainly am open to any committee member's thoughts. Making a recommendation that that the Metro Code be amended to allow the Employee Benefit Board the ability to determine appropriate out-of-pocket maximums, co-insurance, and plan provisions, I think is something like that. And again, I think the board has the right to then accept, reject, or amend those. And maybe, again, I think the onus is going to be on the Employee Benefit Board to really help to flesh out what that code language should look like with the Department of Law. And then the council will then consider that. So I don't want to oversimplify it, but I don't know that we need to overcomplicate it. But I do understand the concerns you've raised. I think they're valid concerns. And I think a recommendation from the committee that says that Title III be amended to allow the board to determine appropriate co-insurance, deductible, or plan provisions related to the PPO, I believe could accomplish, and then allow the board and the council to really flesh out what that looks like in actual code language, I think could get us there. I don't know if Nikki's still on the call or she has different thoughts, but I think that recommendation would allow the board and then the council the flexibility not to eliminate, but to allow the governing board of benefits to have robust discussions and make appropriate plan changes, some of which may require still a council approval through a resolution process like our choice fund and account-based plan. I think that might accomplish that with that recommendation. Nikki, do you believe that that would be the case?
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yes, that is an option for the committee to consider with regards to its recommendation. As Ms. Hall indicated, the final change to the code will depend on what the Metro Council and the Benefit Board does with the initial recommendation. The Benefit Board or Council can decide that out-of-pocket maximums and minimums will need to ultimately be approved by resolution of the Metropolitan Council before they become effective. So providing final oversight on the nature of the change that's made to the out-of-pocket maximum and leaving that to the Metropolitan Council. So the Benefit Board will have a say, but Council will ultimately make the determination before any change to the current provisions are made.
Thank you, Nikki. And I just want to note that that recommendation to modify the language to kind of give the board the authority to set those plan provisions would be consistent with how we handle our other medical plans. And ultimately, the board will decide whether or not they need to amend those plans. I don't know that they will change a co-insurance. I also, as I've outlined, and part of the reason why we brought this, I don't think that the board's interested in looking at simply a cost shift. I think the goal would hopefully be to allow flexibility for the board to find a way to reduce plan costs for members, because that is one of the big asks that has come out of our workforce survey. So with that, I just want to make sure that everybody knew that I think that recommendation would be consistent with how we legislate and manage and make plan changes for our other medical plans as well.
This is Dick Chapman. I'd like to make a couple comments about my thoughts on this matter. My impression was initially you wanted to remove the language in its entirety to do away with the restriction on the out-of-pocket maximum for the PPO plan. That would be consistent with every other benefit provision that's set in the plan by the Benefit Board. There, as I think you've outlined to us, there's nothing in the Metropolitan Code that sets the provisions of any of the plans, the health plans, not the pension plan, but the health plans, except the out-of-pocket maximums. Is that correct?
I'm so sorry. On this particular plan, yes, but I do want to outline that there are certain provisions of our other plan that may require certain plan provisions, big ones like this, to still be considered and approved by council, as Nikki's talked about, just by resolution, not in the code.
Okay. So they basically review and advise by resolution rather than by law.
Correct. And it allows the board to kind of make recommendations, make determinations. This particular code language, the way that legal has explained it to us, if something is in Title III of the code, it cannot be modified unless there is a recommended change from study and formulating and then is modified through the entire legislative process, the board and then the Metro Council. So yes, I want to make sure that the committee's comfortable. There will still be there'll be robust discussion and approval by the Employee Benefit Board before anything could happen, and that there still may be appropriate approvals by council via resolution for some of those changes.
And the council could effectively direct the benefit board to reconsider their action.
I do see a hand raised by our legal advisor, Nikki Ecke. You have the floor, Nikki.
Sure. I just wanted to just add to what Ms. Hall has indicated, which is currently the PPO plan outlines in the code the out-of-pocket max and the co-insurance, the 80-20 or 40-60. For the other self-insured plans, the Metro Code then contains a provision that allows for the adoption of additional self-insured plans, but says that those plans must be approved by resolution of the Metropolitan Council. So the parameters of those other self-insured plan, like the plan that's administered by Cigna, is not in the code. Instead, the parameters are in a resolution that's adopted by council. And in order to vary what's in that resolution, council will need to approve any such changes to the resolution. So in that manner, council is kept apprised of any changes that are to be made to these other self-insured plans. But the actual parameters are not set forth in the code. It just specifies that they need to be approved by resolution of the Metropolitan Council.
This is Dick Chapman again. So effectively, a revision to the code, the metropolitan ordinances, could require that the council approve by resolution not only the extra plans that are now approved by resolution, but also the basic provisions of the PPO plan if there was an adjustment to the general provisions in law today.
Correct. The committee can recommend that one way they could possibly word their recommendation is that these parameters that are set for the PPO plan in the code, which is the out-of-pocket max, that they can be modified by resolution of the Metropolitan Council. So the current out-of-pocket max will be set forth in the code, but with the specific authorization that council can modify those out-of-pocket max by resolution at any time. So
okay, but if we wanted to give the benefits board the authority to act on the construction of the PPO plan to the same extent that they do with the Cigna plan, and provide that the council can review the PPO plan to the same extent that it reviews the Cigna plan, that could be allowed for as well, and that could be our recommendation, because that still gives the council some review ability, but it gives the ability of the benefit board to set the plan of benefits in the exact same way it's already doing. I guess what I'm trying to do is find a way to get out of the out-of-pocket maximum being set by a portion of the ordinance that the council has to adopt, because it doesn't provide enough flexibility to modify the plan in a way that makes it comparable with other plans that are available elsewhere.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. So are you indicating the adding language to the Metro Code that just says that these terms and provisions of the PPO plan can be modified by resolution of the Metro Council?
No, that's not what I'm proposing.
Okay.
I would propose to take out the language like we initially heard several months ago, take out the language that sets the out-of-pocket maximum for the PPO plan. Now, that's what I thought was the original proposal. And I'll have to admit, I have not read the detail in the code as far as how far it goes to specify the benefits of the PPO plan. But it's interesting to me that we want to set, or we currently have a limitation on what the benefit board can do for one of the plan options, but not for any of the other plan options, other than to say the council gets to pass a resolution which says the plan's approved. And the resolution may be different than that because I haven't read one.
Okay, well, I think historically what happened is the PPO and its parameters were codified in the Metro Code. And then Metro wanted to adopt additional self-insured plans. So language was added to the code that says, in addition to the PPO plan, that additional self-insured plans can be adopted, and that those plans do not become effective until approved by resolution of the Metro Council, which just takes one reading. So that's really historically what happened, is that you had a PPO and Metro and the benefit board wanted the ability to offer other self-insured plans. And that's why language was then added in the code to say, in addition to the PPO plan, additional self-insured plans can be adopted, but that they don't become effective until approved by the Metro Council. So currently the code outlines the parameters of the PPO plan, which is the co-insurance, the 80-20 for in-network and 60-40 for out-of-network, and the out-of-pocket maximums, and then says that other conditions of the plan shall be as approved by the benefit board. So certainly the committee can recommend that the parameters that are specified for the PPO plan be modified such that the terms and conditions of the PPO plan will be approved in the same manner as other self-insured plans.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Brasso. Do you happen to have any questions or thoughts on this recommendation?
I mean, I'm kind of two minds about it. I do find it odd that this is, the way that it's singled out or placed in the code, especially, with that amount. And I do understand how it restricts the benefit board. At the same time, I felt like it was put there as a protection, and, just the wholesale removal of it does give me concern, but I understand that it's also not entirely reasonable. So at this point, I don't really know where I land on it, other than I know I would like to be able to, at minimum, expand it to give them, leeway, at least for the next 5 years, to do, what they think is necessary.
So let me ask the committee this. Who would be comfortable with the recommendation of amending the language as recommended by Ms. Stack?
I guess I would say that, and maybe I'm missing something, but to me, that amendment is not much different than just the wholesale removal. Or is there an element there that I'm missing?
This is Kim Stagg. Ms. Hall and Ms. Heckey, I want to make sure you're aware, the subsection 110 of the Metro Code, there are two sentences. The first is the annual out-of-pocket maximum for individual PPO coverage shall be $1,000 and for family coverage, $2,000. The code section then goes on to say the individual out-of-pocket non-PPO maximum shall be $5,000 and family shall be $10,000. So may I ask you, Ms. Hall, are you looking for a recommendation out of this committee to give the benefit board flexibility on just the PPO plan or on all medical plans, including a non-PPO plan?
Right now, we are asking for a recommendation to modify the PPO plan language consistent with how we manage and determine and approve our other medical plan options. I feel like Ms. Eke gave a very good possible consideration from a committee recommendation. A lot of those details can be then fleshed out by the board as far as what that code language would look like, but I believe the concept that Ms. Eke had outlined as a possible consideration, all we're asking for is the ability to determine those same plan provisions like we do any other medical plan provisions on any of our other plans, which at times also includes not only full approval and robust determinations made by the Employee Benefit Board, but also at times certain council approvals of those self-insured plans as Ms. Eke. So what the recommendation and what Ms. Eke has outlined as a possible consideration is that this language be modified to allow the Employee Benefit Board and subsequently council to offer medical plans in the same manner that they do our other medical plans. And I do believe that Ms. Eke's outline of that recommendation made sense.
Okay. I fully support your and Ms. Eke's recommendation in this regard. I do want to make sure you know there is a the subsection 110 language sets out-of-pocket maximums for both PPO and non-PPO. And if you're looking for a recommendation that we simply put decisions about out-of-pocket maximums into the hands of the benefit board with approval by resolution of council, that makes perfect sense to me. To amend the code to state just that and give the benefit board and Metro Council flexibility in this regard.
This is Dick Chapman. I have a question. Ms. Staggs, where are you reading from?
I am reading section 3.08110 of the Metro Code. The current version is December 4th, 2020. It appears after subsection E.
Okay, because I'm looking at the version that was provided in the notebook that was sent to us. It's page CD 308-1, and my version is 1008, lower right-hand corner. Am I reading in the right place?
Mr. Chapman?
Yes.
This is Shannon Hall. It should be the exact same language. I suspect that you are working off a printed version.
I am.
And Ms. Stagg may be looking at the same.
She may be looking at it on a Westlaw or something, because she's a lawyer and I'm not.
Having been the Metro clerk, they look a little different. We do have a printed version that we supply to departments. I assume that is what our staff, but having been the person that oversaw the Metro Code of Laws for a few years, they are one and the same. This code section has not changed, and the provisions should be the exact same. But this is exactly the section we would want modified.
Shannon, hi, this is Kelly Lewis, and you and Nikki can, I believe what Ms. Stagg is reading, though, the way that's worded, I can see where it might be confusing. But that language, the 5,000 and 10,000 is the PPO out-of-pocket max if they go out of network. It's the, so the 1,000 and the 2,000 is the maximum for in-network, but if they go out of network, that was the 5 and 10. So it's not the non-PPO plans, it's the PPO plan out-of-network coverage, out-of-pocket maximums.
That's very helpful. That's very helpful.
Because PPO is defined in that section, and non-PPO to refer to in-network and out-of-network providers.
I'm wondering if a good solution at this point would be to allow Ms. Hall and Ms. Ecke to adjust the recommendation cell on this spreadsheet to something that is consistent with the discussions we've had here on this call.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question about what do you mean? Do you mean the benefit board would establish a plan of benefits that would be subject to review by the council via consideration of a resolution of the council?
Mr. Chapman, this is Shannon. I think the intent here, and I feel like Ms. Ecke's possible consideration, I think, captured it. I think we're talking, I think what Ms. Stagg is asking is, could we modify what the current recommendation says on the spreadsheet, which just says remove language, because that's not necessarily the full intent here. The full intent here is to allow the appropriate approvals and processes like other medical plans for these kinds of plan determinations, similar to our other medical plans. So I think, to be honest with you, I feel like Ms. Ecke's language, and I certainly would love to go back after the meeting and just take an excerpt of what she had proposed at the end, seems to accomplish that. We're not trying to skate out of any approval or review or bait and switch on our membership or the benefit board or the council. So I think what Ms. Stagg is asking is, would Nikki and I maybe take a stab at modifying the language on Ms. Hickey's spreadsheet under possible recommendation, and instead of having removed language in Metro Code section 3.08, say modify code language in Metro section 3.08 110, and then I would propose capturing some of the great language that Ms. Ecke had offered at the conclusion of her initial comments.
Would you agree to give us a draft of the language?
Oh yes, I would say if Ms. Ecke could remember the beautiful language that she had and repeat it out loud, we can say it out loud for everyone. But if she's comfortable with that, if not, we'll go back and Christina and I can go back and listen to it, and then put that as a possible consideration for your next meeting on that particular item. Whichever.
I mean, that would make me feel a little better if you were going to get us in a position of advocating something. If we could look at the draft language, that would be very helpful.
So legal will work with human resources to to draft the language that then will be provided to the committee at its next meeting.
That sounds good.
Mr. Chapman, I think that speaks to some of our points about really focusing on the recommendations at this point. Every recommendation will have to be voted on and blessed specifically by this committee. So we're not going to develop any of that. Like we're happy to offer you input, but all of those will be at your full approval.
Oh yeah, and you can tell I'm pretty ornery about this stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall and Ms. Ecke, for taking on that task. Very much appreciated.
Yes, thank you. I know, first, are there any other questions or comments as it relates to the out-of-pocket maximums? Okay, we will wait the language from Ms. Ecke and Ms. Hall. I know we are pressed for time with about 19 minutes left in this session, and I know that jumping into a new item would, to me, seem, we have a rather extensive conversations about each item. So I am recommending that we basically hold off the additional items to the next meeting. I don't, Ms. Hickey, I don't know if there's anything scheduled already, but would anyone have any concerns about holding off the additional items until the next meeting?
This is Dick Chapman. I want to make a couple comments, if I might. I would be glad to take on writing a draft of our observations about the general pension plan. And then I'll send that to Christina so she can send it to you so that I don't violate any of the restrictions that are placed on us of actually talking with each other at any other time other than a public meeting.
Excuse me, when you say the general observations, are you saying, concerns? Are you saying start drafting a recommendation? Can you expound on that for me, please?
Okay, in the letter that we got from the finance director and the chief of operations out of the mayor's office, there was a request for us to review the basic provisions of the retirement plan to make observations about the retirement plan, i.e., is it well funded? Are they doing the kinds of things with experience studies and actuarial analysis, being properly funded on an annual basis? Is the benefit structure appropriate given the structure of the workforce? Those are the kinds of things I think they were asking about. And I'd be glad to take a run at that on behalf of the board.
Well, it's interesting because my concern is, and I can't speak for the amount of time you have and the effort you will put into any of this, but I do have a concern that you will be putting some time into effort into some things that we really, the recommendation, if you look at, I think it's line 4, or the 4th line in the possible recommendation sections, it looks like at this time, there's like no recommendation basically needed because the pension, is funded, I guess, pretty well at this point. And in addition to that, what you're talking about seems to would require a really extensive conversation and a lot of work there. So that's just some thoughts that I have. I would love to hear the rest of the committee. And I say that to say that I think that when we're talking about the pension funding and the contribution rate and everything there, that alone could take up, at least 3 hours, itself. And so I would be concerned that we're putting time into something that we're not going to have a recommendation coming from this committee on, and that we've seen and we have studied, but there's not really a next step for us in this space. But I mean, that's just my initial thoughts here. I think if we would have had this conversation in, June or July, I think this may have been different, but I would be glad to hear what others have to say.
I do have a thought on that very briefly, and that is if Mr. Chapman is proposing to prepare a brief recommendation on simply what this committee believes could be the next steps, recall that while the mayor must convene this committee at least every 5 years, it can do so sooner. And given the challenges of COVID and meeting virtually and the late setup of this committee and delays we have had, if Mr. Chapman is talking about a recommendation that just simply says as a next step, we would ask that consideration be given to convening another formulating committee sooner than 5 years from now. So some of the more difficult issues such as pension reform, and other potential major changes to the benefit packages could be considered and studied. I would fully support that kind of recommendation at this point coming out of this committee.
Mr. Chapman, any thoughts on that? Is that where you were leading with this?
My general thoughts were that we would make observations about the processes that Metro is using to run the pension plan, the status of the funding of the pension plan, because I think there is some confusion, perhaps in the council and perhaps in the public, between the OPEB liability that's being talked about and the pension liability that's being talked about. And I think observations by this body that says you should do an actuarial evaluation every 2 years or every year, you should fully fund it, and it's fully funded, i.e. the council putting up the money in the appropriation bill to do that. And the plan is, according to the actuary, based on market valuation of the assets, funded at an 85 or a 95% level, and that's considered fully funded. Those kinds of observations are helpful to say, essentially, Metro's doing the right thing by its pension benefit. And we can take those steps. I mean, we can make those observations. I'd be glad to write that stuff, let you guys look at it. If you don't like it, you could say we aren't going to include it, or you can say I'd like to modify it in the following ways. Or if people have suggestions about specific things about the retirement plan that need to be considered, then we go at it. And the mayor can, under the code, can ask for an extension of our appointment time, and considering that we didn't start until the end of August, we've been moving right along. But I'd be glad to take a run at that and make it subject. I mean, I'd be glad to withdraw if I ran into a lot of resistance over the language.
Mr. Brasso, any thoughts from you?
I mean, not really. I'd be curious to see what Mr. Chapman put together. He was wanting to do that.
Great. Well, Mr. Chapman, as you mentioned, you will work on your information. You'll provide it to Ms. Hickey, and she'll distribute it from there. Great.
It'll be up before the next meeting.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts?
Mr. Dick Chapman, there's a discussion point in here about offering a new plan a low cost, those kind of things. I personally have some reservations about that because I get concerned about offering a low cost plan that people migrate into that plan, stay there for a while, and then when they have need for medical treatment, like having a child or something like that, they're going to want to migrate back into the more expensive plan. Plus, retirees are going to have a tendency to migrate. Even if we're moving people into a Medicare Advantage plan, we have people who are going to be retired who are going to want a health plan. They're going to be more likely to use health care benefits. They're going to select the higher plan and load it up. And we aren't going to have the ability to balance the cost of that plan unless we're going to basically put all the plans in a solid pool. We aren't going to be able to subsidize the older workers with the less expensive younger workers. So I have a reservation about that. But those are, I think, the language question based on the PPO and offering a separate low-cost plan are separate issues. They currently appear in one item, but they are separate issues.
Okay. Can you be prepared to expand on that a bit more at the next meeting?
I'll even write something down and send it to Christina.
Great, thank you. Okay. Well, if there's no additional questions or comments or so, Christina, I think we should probably, talk about what scheduling looks like and any concerns that you or anyone else from HR may have as it relates to how, we are less than a month out from February, and considering it's January 7th and things are going pretty quickly, we want to talk about what those next steps may be scheduling-wise.
Thank you, Chair Rucker. I agree with that we do have a limited time frame here, and that I believe our next steps here are for our legal advisor and director, Shannon Hall, will revise that recommendation for removing that Metro Code language, or probably better said, amending that Metro Code language for this spreadsheet so that the committee can review that on the next meeting, which is scheduled for the 22nd. We should probably go ahead and get some dates lined up for that first meeting in February. So we will have an updated spreadsheet and then probably go through a couple more of these lines that we didn't get to today. And then also give Mr. Chapman the opportunity to present the information that the committee had agreed that he requested to put together. So as far as the next committee meeting, I think that is probably, unless something else comes up in the meantime, the agenda would be to go over the spreadsheet, look at the recommendations again, hopefully finalize some recommendations, and then listen to some new information that Mr. Chapman has agreed to put together for the committee.
That sounds like a great plan. Thank you.
Sorry. Are there any other questions, comments? If not, we will adjourn the meeting and we will resume this on the 22nd.
Christina, Mark Young, I have my hand up, please.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm on the presenter screen and this is a little new, so I've been kind of going up and down to see. So please, Mr. Young, if you'll just introduce yourself and who you're with.
Mark Young, I'm the president of the Firefighters Association. I just want to let the committee know, and anybody else, that we are committed to educating, bringing our retirees to meetings or sending out information to help them make a decision, and maybe the right decision. I've got some very well-respected retirees that are on board to help them make a decision to move to the Advantage plan. We'll do that, and we may need some help, just some, like today, these presentations that we've seen would be very helpful. And I guess my next question is, Christina, is there any way that we can get these presentations emailed to us?
Mark, yes, those presentations, as all the other previous ones, will be available on the HR site where the agendas are posted. Robbie Gaines, administrative assistant, has been posting those. So these presentations she already has, so she will be posting the attachments for this meeting as well onto the HR website where the agendas are posted.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Any other comments, suggestions before we adjourn? And we will reconvene on the 22nd. If no more comments or concerns or questions, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.